The one with the girl who hits Joey is the 15th episode of the 5th season of Friends. This is directed by Kevin Bright, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I talk about the episode and share some thoughts. And there are 3 main parts to the narrative, so I will discuss each of them in turn. I really liked this episode. Soleil Frye is brilliant, really great to have her in this. So I'll talk about that part first. She is, of course, the girl who hits Joey. And they make a lot of fun out of her because she is short. And how can a short girl hurt Joey when she does these seemingly playful punches? But there's actually quite a bit of force in those punches, and everybody else is making fun of Joey for the fact that he's complaining that this woman is hitting him and it hurts. And Joey doesn't really know if he wants to continue seeing her. He likes her, but the punching is getting out of hand. And she ends up playfully punching Rachel at one point. And Rachel's not having it, so she just kicks her full force in the shin. And I thought that was certainly a very violent way to take things, but I think it was definitely a fun way to carry the narrative. And I quite like that part of it. And as I said, Soleil Frye is brilliant, so that's something that I'm always going to enjoy about this episode. Ross has moved into his new apartment, and Steve, who lives in the building, played by Willie Garson, comes to greet Ross and say hello and also ask him for money because Howard the handyman is retiring and he thinks Ross should chip in for the retirement gift. And of course, Ross has never met Howard the handyman. Howard the handyman has never done any work for Ross, and Ross doesn't think that he should give any money. And to be honest, I agree with Ross. It's a bit strange to pitch in for somebody's retirement if you've never met them before or they've never done anything. But at the same time, what's a couple of dollars for Ross? So maybe he should have just given the money and, made a good first impression with the neighbours, but he's not willing to do that. Instead, he decides to throw a party. And he does this, and he has name tags ready. And then the next thing we know, there's a lot of noise and music coming from across the hall, and it turns out that that's Howard's party. And Phoebe is there as well. Accidentally, she thought it was Ross's party. And then Ross eventually does join in with the party. Things are going fine, no problems at all. And then he cut the cake. He cut Howard's cake without anybody else cutting it first. And needless to say, it's not the best first impression for Ross, but I like that we've jumped head first in with Ross moving into the apartment. I'm glad we didn't have too much time to waste there. It's a great set design. I really love it. I think Ross's apartment is really brilliant, and I'm really glad that they made the decision to move Ross there. It's much nicer than his previous apartment, and obviously we couldn't have him with no abode for too long, so that worked very well. And then the main narrative, or at least the narrative that I think takes up the bulk of the episode, focuses, of course, on Chandler and Monica. And the opening scene basically picks up where the last episode left off. At the end of the previous episode, Ross saw Chandler and Monica through the window of his new apartment. And at the beginning of this episode, he runs to the apartment and he can't get in because they've put the latch on the door, or the chain, I think. And I did find that a little bit funny because they never, ever lock the doors. So I found that to be pretty amusing, that the one time Ross is trying to barge in, he can't. And obviously he's very annoyed at first and confused about what Chandler is doing. And then he realises that they're in love and he's happy about it. And I like the fact that we didn't really sit with Ross's emotions about it for too long. We didn't make a big deal about it. Immediately in, I think, the next scene, we're in Central Park and Ross is there and he's happy and everything is fine. And I think that pacing for Ross kind of finding out about it and then just getting on with it, I thought was really well done. Everybody's winding Chandler up, saying that they're going to be talking about babies and marriage from now on. And then a little later on, Rachel tells Chandler that Monica has been thinking about weddings since she was a little girl, and Chandler begins to panic about this, and he confronts Monica, and they have a fight. Now, in Chandler's defense, he did try and do the right thing afterwards. He asks Monica in Central Park what he can do to make things right, and she can forgive him, and he's all cute again. But she's not going to hand things to him that easily this time. She's kind of fed up of telling Chandler what to do in the relationship, which I think is fair enough. There comes a point where Chandler needs to think for himself and work out what the right thing is, because if you're telling somebody how to treat you in a relationship, that's not great. So I think Monica was maybe a little bit harsh, and that's mostly because Chandler was just adorable. But at the same time, I understand that she was doing what I think is probably the right thing. Chandler, however, didn't do the right thing. And I'd say this is probably quite predictable, and I think it works really well. Obviously, I've seen this episode many times, but I feel like Chandler proposing is not something I would have expected for this episode. Everybody's response was fantastic, because everybody knew he was proposing for the wrong reasons. And Monica asked him what he was doing, and he said, "I'm doing this because I'm sorry." Obviously, not the best reason to propose. I think Monica handled it really well. I think she handled it sensitively. I think she realised Chandler was struggling with finding the right thing to do. And at that point, I think she realised he did need a bit of a helping hand with the way things should go. And I think everything worked out in the right direction there. And then we end in Central Park with everybody making fun of Chandler for proposing. And it's lighthearted. And then Ross ruins it by mentioning the fact that he and Rachel were on a break, and his response, or his facial expression when he realised that nobody else thought this was funny, was brilliant. And it was just a nice way to end things. It's a really solid episode. I love every aspect of this. The story with Howard the handyman, really good fun, nice way to really introduce us to Ross's new apartment and the building. Soleil Moon Frye is brilliant as Katie. I don't know if I mentioned her name. She's called Katie. And then, of course, Chandler and Monica. Now everybody knows, and we can move forward with that. And I'm rather happy about that, of course. So it's a solid episode. I don't know if I'd ever consider it an all-time favourite. Maybe from season 5. I'm not sure. Maybe. But either way, it's a brilliant episode. I'll always be happy to watch it. Definitely a really solid episode of Friends.